Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming here today. My name is Trooper Joe Sudarellis with the State Police Public Information's Office, and it is my privilege to introduce today's guests that are joining us today. Standing here with me, the Honorable Governor of the great state of Connecticut, Ned Lamont, the Commissioner of Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, James C. Ravella, the Colonel of the Connecticut State Police, Stravos Malikas, joined by Lieutenant Colonel Eckersley, Lieutenant Colonel Montini, and various members of the Connecticut State Police Command Staff, the Chief of the City of New Haven, Tony Reyes, the Police Chief of the City of Bridgeport, Armando Perez, and the Police Chief of the City of Hartford, Jason Thadi. At this moment, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Ravella, who will join me at the podium to say a few words.
Thank you, Trooper. Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming, especially on such short notice. And at the end, we'll take some questions and start to move through this a little bit. So this endeavor started for the Connecticut State Police and Emergency Services and Public Protection back in the spring. I had the opportunity, or my staff had the opportunity, to visit each and every chief and discuss summertime violence. It happens every year, doesn't it? And we wanted to discuss it early, and we wanted to have some plan in place from the perspective of how can we help. And that's what we tried to do. Initially, and right away, we opened the doors to the Connecticut State Police Scientific Services Laboratory in Meriden. Dr. Valero is here, and what we did is we made expedited NIBIN hits. What that is it's a National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, and it's like a fingerprint system for ballistic casings that show up at all these crime scenes. So we made the three cities a priority right away. Doctor has also expedited DNA requests and some criminalistic requests from the chiefs of these cities for their cases that involve violence. So we all knew this was going to happen, and the chiefs are the sovereign law enforcement officers for their geographical areas, and we respect that. So how do we help? And we revisited with the chiefs and spoke to them all. They're a tale of three cities, but they do have some underlying commonalities. And those commonalities revolve around narcotics, and they revolve around lack of manpower to their normal staffing levels. In some cases, it's 75. In other cases, it's 100 officers short. So how do we supplement that? And we talked about that with the chiefs. And they made specific requests from us. Some of those requests included things that we can easily achieve right away, and we jumped on them. For instance, they even asked for a detective for their investigative area. Very easy for us to assist with the Connecticut State Police. Hartford asked for a variety of things. Hartford asked for 2 detectives to be embedded into their violence reduction team. They will pull back 1 detective, Hartford Police detective, and use him back in narcotics from the statewide task force, and we'll look forward to seeing him again after the violence passes. The mayor has made specific requests to other agencies, Department of Correction, which also has 1 person there presently, and he's asked probation and parole to kick things along with the Hartford State's Attorney's Office. So he's looking for a holistic approach along the same lines as the violent reduction teams in the past. Bridgeport has asked for a couple uniformed troopers for visibility and to be walking in the areas where they need it most. And all 3 have asked for some sort of funds over and above what their normal overtime is. And what that is, ladies and gentlemen, let's be specific about it. It is not to arrest mass people. We're not into this to arrest full street corners, to increase arrest. We're into this for prevention. We're into this for visibility and increased levels of investigative services. We're interested in the right people doing the shooting, those folks carrying the guns. Let's be realistic here. Some people are going to go to jail. No doubt about it. They're going to be carrying guns and they're going to be shooting people. Let's admit that right away. And that's going to happen. And we're going to slow down this violence. It is a public health epidemic, the shooting of our young people in these cities. So, with that said, the governor paid a lot of attention to this when he first hired me, and he's paid a lot of attention to it going forward. He's been very generous. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, before we start taking questions, I'd like to introduce the governor of the great state of Connecticut. Governor?
Thanks, Commissioner. I feel very fortunate to have folks who really know what they're doing standing here. The commissioner and I got together last week. We've been talking quite a bit over the last few months, a little bit in anticipation of the warm summer months when he said, as a former chief of police in Hartford, Commissioner Avella, that sometimes there could be a spike in violence. And he said the first thing we got to do is be responsive to our chiefs. And that's what we've tried to do. And the chief here in New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford reached out. And the commissioner said how we're trying to respond, trying to give them the support they need to help in their own jurisdiction. I think as a governor, my responsibility is to get the best people I can and give them the support and that they need. And I think that's what I've tried to do here. And to me, it's doubly important, public safety, not just what it means for each and every one of you and your families and your communities, and a sense of security and that you deserve. And that is of paramount importance to us. But I've also been a governor who said how important it is to continue to bring our cities back to life and make them thriving urban centers where families know that they can walk safely and their kids can grow up and be safe. And we're never going to have great cities unless we have great, safe cities where families know that they can be safe. And what we've done here is preventative. We're paying attention ahead of the curve right now. What we tried to do in our budget is project longevity and other ways that we can better work with the community, working hand in hand in conjunction with law enforcement and the state troopers, do everything we can to give you 100% confidence we're doing everything we can to keep your community safe. With that, Commissioner, would you like to come back up?
So, ladies and gentlemen, the three chiefs are available. Dr. Valero is available for some questions. We'd like to thank our OPM representatives who have really cut through the margins to make this work quickly. I appreciate that, Mark Palka. So questions, please, and I'll be able to direct them.
Well, actually, for you, Commissioner, the state police isn't at full capacity, so is this a problem for you?
As long as we stay in the investigative realm, no, it isn't a problem. And the couple troopers that we're sending to Bridgeport, not really a problem yet. But we're prepared in the long run to provide more assistance. And yes, it could be a long-run problem for us. Today I have operationally approximately 880 state troopers to include the command staff. So it could be a problem in the long run.
And for the chiefs of the three cities, could you detail for us this? Have you seen, all of you seen spikes in recent weeks? I mean, we know some of this stuff has been covered on television and in the newspapers and on the websites.
Yeah, our biggest problems are the juveniles. Juveniles are our biggest concern, and there's a number of reasons for that. But in Bridgeport, we had 2 homicides recently, one in Green Homes and another one on Horace Street, committed by juveniles. And we're going to make the arrests. We have warrants. We know who they are. But how do I bring those other people back to their homes, to their families? So how can I bring justice to those families? It's hard. And let me tell you, I am so grateful to the commissioner and to the governor who stepped up to the plate and delivered for us. So thank you.
Chief Reyes?
Can I ask about, so Project Longevity was supposed to
Could
be
we let the
getting
other
at some of
chiefs
the...
answer the question?
Absolutely.
Chief Duddy and Chief Reyes? You're the chief from Hartford, right?
Chief from New Haven. Tony Reyes from New Haven. I think Commissioner Ravella summed it up the best in terms of our goal here is about prevention. Yes, we've had a spike in New Haven, a lot of it related to group violence. We've done a lot, especially recently, to mitigate that violence. We just did an effort where we took down, together with the FBI, 25 of our most violent individuals within the city after several months of a long-term investigation with the FBI. So we're continuing to do what we need to do to mitigate this. This goes a long way. I want to echo what my colleague from Bridgeport said and say a big thank you to the governor and to the commissioner because we can't do this without resources and we cannot prevent crime without funds. And so this will go a long way to help us do that. But yes, we did experience some spikes. We've begun efforts to mitigate that, especially in the last few weeks. We've seen a significant drop. But this will help us continue in that effort.
Chief Duddy?
Good afternoon. I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Commissioner Ravella, having sat in the same chair. He fully understands, everything that we deal with up there, and so I appreciate his support and the governor as well. The news has pretty well covered in the last 3 to 4 weeks. We have had a spike in our violent incidents, predominantly shooting-related incidents. One thing that we see up there is there are a lot of individual crimes. There's not a lot of connectivity between them, and they range from resulting from a larceny to involving drugs to group violence as well. What we've taken in Hartford is we've tried to take a collaborative approach from our stakeholders in the community, like Compass Peace Builders, to the state resources, to the federal resources, and we're just trying to take a comprehensive approach. Our reaction as law enforcement is always, there's a spike. What do we have to do to quell that spike as law enforcement? And we just can't work in a silo like that. It has to be more collaborative. We don't have all the answers in law enforcement. So,
there was one about an hour and a half ago in South End.
There was, yes. We had a shooting, yep. We're looking at each one of these individual cases. As you've seen, we've made arrests in a lot of these cases, but there has got to be a more collaborative approach with both Department of Corrections, with the prosecutor's office, and with our federal and state partners, and that's what this is. This is a step in that direction.
So there was an increase in the budget in project longevity, but you also mentioned that juveniles have been involved in some of these in these shootings. So what programs are we not funding or not getting to the youth in time to prevent this violence?
Let me first introduce to you Mark Palka from OPM to talk about project longevity, if I may. Mark.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I'm Mark Palka from the Office of Policy Management, and OPM is the administrator of the Project Longevity Grant, and as the Governor Lamont mentioned prior to his inauguration, he championed Project Longevity as a key tool for cities to deploy to reduce gun violence, and he championed an increase in funding for Project Longevity, and Christine had asked about resources available to cities in responding to upticks in violent crime. Historically, Project Longevity was not funded at parity levels across the jurisdictions that are eligible for state funding for the grant. New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford are the 3 that are outlined in statute as being eligible for Project Longevity. So the approximate doubling of Project Longevity funding in the current budget, which the governor signed into law, will allow there to be greater parity across all 3 jurisdictions to provide greater fidelity to the model and consistency in how it's applied. And the vision for Project Longevity is to link together law enforcement at the police and prosecutors, faith community, community groups across the jurisdictions, and work with the small number of people, relatively speaking, who are responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime and violence in cities in our state, and to wrap around those individuals who have been identified as being at risk or contributing to violence with services and supports, but also accountability to police, to prosecutors, to the criminal justice system. And regarding the vision for juvenile justice, there is an opportunity through Project Longevity and other approaches to focus on particular populations that are perhaps not eligible for the adult system, but are in the juvenile justice system that would benefit from these targeted interventions. Project Longevity is one example of a much broader approach within our cities of how law enforcement and the community can work together to respond to upticks in violent crime.
So the lack of funding for Project Longevity, do you think that has contributed to an inability to intervene at an earlier stage?
I think that the lack of funding at parity levels across the jurisdictions impeded efforts to focus on a population disproportionately responsible for violent crime in our cities. I had the pleasure, thanks to Governor Lamont, of sitting down with the police chiefs from Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven before, and I heard from them directly about what their vision was for how Project Longevity can be strengthened under the increased funding and accountability to serve their jurisdiction's specific needs. As Commissioner Ravella said, it's really a tale of 3 cities. It's also a variation across the neighborhood, district, and block level concerning the challenges that cities are experiencing. So it's a targeted tool.
What's happening with some of the other cities? Because I cover the city of, my paper covers the city of Waterbury, and there's been a spike of shootings in there. And it is group on group violence that they're seeing there. We just saw a big drug bust in New Britain. So what about, what's happening in some of these other cities?
Paul, do you mean Project Longevity or more broadly kind of public safety?
You know, I mean, what are you know, this is, obviously, you're concentrating here on the three biggest cities here, but there's other cities with issues.
The three biggest cities were the priority initially because of the spike in violence, which was very, very public and reported by the media. My staff will be reaching out to the next level down on cities, which includes Waterbury, Stamford, New London, New Willimantic, New Britain. And then I'm also seeing a little spike in crime in some of these smaller jurisdictions, right? When I look at Hamden or I look at Meriden. So this is more of a holistic approach, and we'll get to it, and we'll reach out to those other municipalities.
And how does the summertime spike in violent crime and in shootings compare to previous years? I mean, are we seeing, is there an uptick this year compared to previous years? I mean, how does it rate?
So you're talking to a commissioner who's probably got over 38 years of law enforcement experience in the city of Hartford, the majority of that time. You know, I remember the 80s and the 90s, and shootings were out of control. We were looking at 200 plus shootings. We were looking at 40s and 50s and 60s, and we're on parity of we're on parity with Bridgeport. Going back and forth. So we've gotten to a level of crime that we don't want to climb anymore, right? And this is where we are today. The cities have seen, two out of three cities have seen a reduction in Part A crimes, Part 1 crimes. Those are your rapes, your robberies, your murders, your larcenies, and your auto thefts, which is good to hear. And they're also just slightly above last year for homicides, all the cities. And when you look at the shootings, they're starting to creep. And that's why we want to put our foot in the door and make something happen, which means slow it down, let the investigative effort take foot, let the community, who are particularly each mayor and each chief, get involved. And OPM, when we talk about doubling in Project Longevity voice, this is our voice to these folks and these groups and these gangs that are engaging in these violence. Leave your guns at home, don't shoot anybody, and you'll be better off for it. Our federal partners are also on board. And these federal partners even called and asked how they can help. So in comparison to long ago, we're doing pretty well, but we don't want that to slide on us.
Dr. Valero, can you tell us what will you be doing to expedite these investigations? I mean, don't they all go to you anyway?
They all go to us, but we prioritize, so they get first priority, and therefore we decrease the turnaround time of the analysis.
So just do the investigation faster.
Correct. Do the analysis faster.
I have a question specifically about the killing with stabbing of that young man that he was arrested yesterday. Would you be able to help me with that?
I think we're going to do that after.
I see. Okay, good.
I spoke with residents in Hartford's North End yesterday, and you know, many of them have been there for years. They have witnessed crimes, and they really made a plea for mental health resources. Will that be part of this strategy going forward? Will there be resources devoted to mental health for the youth?
The strategy at this time will not include that. This is stopping and slowing down the violence that's occurring right now. That's for a greater conversation, and you've hit on the holistic approach, right? It includes mental health, it includes their community partners, it includes school-based partners too, and counseling in schools. So there's a lot that goes with that, and the governor, to his credit, and not because he's my boss, wants to entertain those conversations, and we've talked about it briefly last Thursday, and he wants to make a change.
We were talking about initially how nationwide there is a spike in summertime violence. And I'm wondering if, as commissioner or the governor, there is communication between other leaders of other states around the country and in other cities that have these similar problems, and even more so. Are there any models in other cities nationwide that you see they're doing successfully that you would like to see here in Connecticut?
Thank you. We often talk to our counterparts in a lot of different areas. I've left the chief realm and I've entered into the National Governors Association realm and the Homeland Security realm, which includes an upper echelon of people, which includes folks like Project Longevity. How do we communicate with that population? It includes less people in jail. And there's no correlation between less people in jail and more shootings, and we're seeing that. How do we communicate with our juveniles? That's big in Bridgeport. That's real big in Bridgeport, and that's something we're going to have to keep talking about as we're moving forward. But the other cities see a spike in violence that'll slow down when folks go back to schools, when there's more opportunity for them. It's really, these are people on people in close proximities, and the simplest of things start these arguments which turn into shootings.
Is it just impossible to stop the flow of guns going into the city? Cities, plural?
No, I'll never say it's impossible to slow that. I will say things like it's not holistic to believe that it's just going to be arrests, right? It's going to be a lot of education to go with that. The legislature, with the governor's help, just passed some serious storage legislation, right, to keep guns locked up and keep them out of the hands of burglars and keep them out of the hands of ending up in the street. Because each chief will tell you, and I'm sure they're going to pipe up and they're going to say that their guns and burglaries hit their streets immediately. And that's that kind of commodity in the street that holds its retail value or exceeds its retail value, right? A firearm. Whereas you could have an expensive TV or an expensive dining room that don't have the value a gun does have on the street. So it is not impossible, but it's a holistic approach.
What are the type of firearms being used in these shootings? Is it the majority, is it handguns?
Chiefs, would you like to? Sure. Majority of them handguns and both.
It's a variety of different weapons, and you guys can agree with that too. Mm-hmm. We're seeing 45s. We're seeing, high capacity magazines. Up to 15 rounds in these magazines, and that's pretty alarming for us. 9 millimeters, 22s. One of the preferred, believe it or not, are the 22s. They're smaller guns. They can easily be concealed, especially in the summertime. You wear shorts. Just throw in the back pants, and there you go. But we recovered a lot of guns so far this year in Bridgeport. We got about 180 plus weapons taken off the streets. Our police officers, narcotics, by our gang unit. So there's a lot of guns out there. Yes.
Do you know where they're coming from? I mean, is there specifics?
Well, they're coming from everywhere. They come down from south. Like Commissioner explained, they're coming down from burglaries. A lot of times, a guy had a safe in his car, and he had 11 guns in Bridgeport last week, and he's in front of one of our housing projects, P.T. Barnum, and somebody broke into the car and took the safe, and now there's 11 guns out there in the street. So a lot of work to be done.
That was when, last week?
Yeah, last week.
I just want to add something about the question you had regarding what other cities around the nation are doing. And, I will tell you that it's not endemic to Connecticut for sure, the gun violence we're seeing. Interestingly, we've had the fortune in New Haven to be doing some pretty good things with Project Longevity. We've had a measure of success over the last few years. We've had other states coming, other cities coming, other people from other law enforcement officers from across the pond coming to see what we're doing in New Haven. And so I'm really invigorated to see that the governor is continuing to fund Project Longevity even greater now, because the fact is that if you buy into it, this philosophy of partnerships, working with our federal, state, local partners, community partners, this is the only way to deal with this issue. This is not just violence is about education. Violence is about socioeconomic issues. There are a lot of underlying issues, mental health issues, and so we need to approach this holistically. Project Longevity allows us a forum to do that. We've had a measure of success. It has to be bought into from the top down. And what we are professing to do, and I've spoken to the other chiefs, we're going to make sure we're communicating more closely, and we're working more closely together, because there shouldn't be a distinction between how Project Longevity is working in one city versus another. And at the end of the day, our collective success is what we're looking for. But in terms of the solutions, other states are coming to us. And so we're doing something right. We just have to keep We just have to keep our focus, and we have to keep doing what we're doing. And the spike, well, these are things that are going to happen. I'm more concerned about when we don't have the recipe. I believe we have the recipe. I think this philosophy of Project Longevity is a way to go. We've had a lot of programs, they come and go, but I think if we buy into this, if we're committed from the top down, and certainly to see the top-down commitment from the state level is encouraging. And I think, so in terms of solutions, I know other states are having equal problems, and they're actually looking to Connecticut for solutions. So that's encouraging.
Can you give us some examples or for instances of what you're doing that everyone considers so admirable?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when we had a delegation from across the pond come in, and other states, we've had other states come in, they're looking for that magic bullet. They're looking for that strategy, that panacea that's going to solve all their problems. And it comes down to collaboration. It comes down to partnerships. And most of them are walking out of the door and says, I don't think we could achieve that. We work in different silos. It's very difficult for us to engage our partners in probation or parole or people in the community. And what we tell them is the success of your community depends on it. And so they walk out sort of, it's anticlimactic. I can tell you honestly that this is not a law enforcement issue. Law enforcement needs to be at the table, but this needs to be a holistic approach. Because at the end of the day, this derives from issues related to social economic status, poverty. And until we deal with the education, until we deal with those issues, law enforcement, we're going to be going from program to program. I think this is a way for us to engage, but at the end of the day, we need to be steadfast that this is a collaborative approach to solving crime. And law enforcement needs to be at the table, not exclusively at the driver's seat.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to cut off the questions at this point. I know the governor has to run, so grab them quickly. The chiefs will hang around. Colonel will hang around if you have any additional questions. But thank you very much for coming.
And I'm going to avail the detective for the killing, stabbing, domestic violence.
Bring it up here, so we don't have to move. Can you do that?
Yeah, all right, you want to back up? Yeah. I just want to say one thing. In about 5 hours, I'm flying off to meet with 25 of my fellow governors. One of the things we talk about is what we can learn from each other, what we can learn in terms of community policing, what I learned listening to the people I'm with here today in terms of making sure that law enforcement is at the table, but they're not the only ones at the table, and what we talk. And to your question, ma'am, I had lunch just last week with somebody in the North End, and he was about my age, and he remembered how dangerous it was when he was growing up, and now he's got grandchildren running around, and he just wants to make sure we don't go back to those days. And we got the best people in the world. I'm standing with them right now, making sure we don't go back to those days, and that's why we're on the game right now. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Governor, any thoughts on Puerto Rico? The protests going on in Puerto Rico right now?
I think the comments from the governor down there seem to have been outrageous, but I think I'll leave that to the people of Puerto Rico.
Do you think he should resign?
I think I'll leave that to those folks, but those comments were way out of bounds.